Josh Connolly, thank you so much for joining us on the Hurt You Lean podcast. I'm incredibly excited for what's going to be a very fruitful conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to be here. Looking forward to it.
So, what has inspired you to write a book about toxic parents?
It's been a bit of a journey to get to the place of writing a book specifically about toxic parents in the way that I have. Originally, a decade ago now, 10 years ago, I started doing some work, volunteering with a charity that supports children affected by a parent's drinking. And sort of from that, I became quite passionate about raising awareness of what was a very sort of secret, stigmatized issue, specifically around children that have grown up with a parent that drinks too much. And then through that, I ended up doing lots of different things and supporting people that have grown up in dysfunction in various ways. And eventually it led me to a place where I found that one of the most under talked about spaces, one of the most like real hush hush things was people that have like emotionally abusive parents. They really don't have any space in our society to be able to talk about their truth without people altering that truth or trying to change it or saying generic things like you only get one mum and dad and you should love them no matter what. And I sort of really realized that there was a much larger group of people that were impacted by that. And so the work that I was doing online and in sort of the group coaching and healing spaces that I was creating, it was coming up more and more. And so I sort of just naturally evolved into supporting people in that space and learning about it. Yeah.
And what originally inspired you to get into that field? Because you yourself were the product of a toxic parent.
Yeah, my dad was an alcoholic. So when my dad died when I was about 9 years old, and I think it's important to say that until I found NACOA, which I found when I was about 25, I was about a year sober at the time. I didn't even realize that I'd had a difficult childhood because I think that Western society particularly wants to sort of sweep it under the carpet. It's so not talked about. And I didn't go to NACOA originally because my dad was an alcoholic. I didn't even think I was the child of an alcoholic, right? I thought I lost my dad when I was young. I just want to support children. But very quickly, doing the training with NACOA, I sort of realized, wow, actually, I'm a child of an alcoholic. I'm impacted by this. And so much of what I'd struggled with and so many of my own struggles started to make sense. I witnessed a lot of dysfunction when I was a child. Not, my dad's behavior when he was drinking and what came with that, the violence, the domestic violence, the police showing up, all of that. But perhaps even more importantly was the dysfunction that came with that, the secrecy that came with that, the kind of sweeping everything under the carpet, pretending things were okay. That stuff in the end, I realized was more damaging for me. That was the stuff that really caused me the most issues. And yet, by the time I was in my mid-teens and my dad had died when I was 9, nobody was connecting the ways that I was feeling, behaving, and showing up. Nobody was connecting that or making any link to the environment that I'd grown up with in those first 9 years. And so when I made the connection, I went from somebody who thought that I was broken and defective to realizing that actually I'd been reacting to the world in the best way that I know how, based on my experiences that I'd had, and rather than that making my experience more difficult, that actually gave me a lot of power. That made me realize that actually, and I believe this to be true in most cases, of most people's struggles, I've never been broken. My environment's not been supportive of my experience.
Mm. I totally agree with you. And I think as Gabor Mate says, about addiction, it's the best worst scenario for children. And actually often we develop these behavioral habits, whether it be drinking, drugs, OCD, to create a semblance of safety and security in a very unsafe environment. And as you say, as you get older, and if you're lucky enough to be able to reflect with a wiser lens, you can actually see that all you need is to, I mean, and I say all you need in a very nonchalant way because it's incredibly hard to then build, but is a sense of inner safety and self-love. And I think when you've always been trying to run away and numb yourself, and almost these behaviors act as an anesthetic, don't they? They anesthetize you to the raw feelings and the sadness. You're not broken, of course you're not, but you've just done the best you can in the environment that you've been brought up in.
Yeah, and I think that's like when you said behaviors, addictions, all of these things, they like nearly work. You know, I found alcohol and drugs for me. That was what I found. But I've had other coping mechanisms, other like behavior patterns that nearly work. They help me to survive, and then they nearly give me the life that I want and that I crave. But they don't quite work. And then you get caught like obsessively chasing and trying to recapture the moment when it felt like it did work, and you get lost in that, you know, and I think that's what happened to me. And in many ways, I'm thankful that I found those coping mechanisms. Because again, I don't believe our culture adequately supports, particularly children, families that have children, right? They're not adequately supported. So like, people think, you know, that if I could go back and speak to the 12-year-old me, I'd be like, don't do drugs, don't do alcohol, right? It's going to really mess your life up. I would go back and say, well done. Well done for finding a way, because nobody was giving me a way to survive. And if I didn't have those things, I'm not sure I would have made it to adulthood. And that's the, you know, one of the many sort of contradictions of things like addiction. It was slowly taking my life away while simultaneously keeping me alive, you know?
I so relate to that. And I think it's a very, powerful way of looking at it, because in fact, they are a lifeline for a lot of people. And they do keep you going because they give you a purpose and they give you a goal. And as you say, in some ways, they so nearly work. So nearly gives you, you know, that endorphin release. But it's just like, it's a very, very finely tuned balance, because, you know, you can't help but wanting more and more and more and more. And then you just go over. And once you've gone over that curve, it just, like, everything then just starts going into free fall, and your whole life just basically, you sort of see, I think, as you get older, the amount that you're sacrificing in order to continue to pursue the addiction.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened to me, you know. When I stopped drinking when I was 24. And the reason I did is because it sort of stopped working in the way that it used to. Like, when I first started drinking it kind of worked, right? When I was like 13, I would drink and life would feel amazing. It would do everything that I needed it to do. By the time I was 23, I'd be in the pub, drunk and still miserable, you know? And what I found is that further kind of cements what we've been saying is, I thought when I stopped drinking, all of my problems would go away. And they didn't. I was left with my problems when I stopped drinking. I was left with the pain. And then some of the behaviors that I thought, I used to blame on alcohol. I only did that because I drank. Then they started coming back. So then life got really, really hard, because now I'm doing all of these things and I can't blame alcohol. And even on the journey that I've been on, it's been 12 and a half years now. You know, I've had so many different coping mechanisms and strategies. Some healthy, some start healthy and then become like a struggle and I have to work on them. You know, even like certain behaviors become like anchors in my life that I use, but then I start picking up too much of them. So little sounds, I don't know, it might sound strange to some people, but like, I have to open the recycling bin before I walk in my house, right? And I can't, if I walk in the house without doing it, I can't quite cope with that, yeah? And then when I do the same process in the morning, I go to the gym and I have the same drink. And again, people probably wouldn't understand this, but these have become like anchors to me. The other week, I took a drink out of the fridge. It was the last one in there. And I got lost talking in the house and I opened it. And I don't normally open it until I got in the car. And my wife came in the kitchen and was like, what's wrong? And I was like, froze. I was like, I've opened this can. Now, if there was more I've done it before, but there's normally more in the fridge. So I can put the full can down and get the next one out and then think, I'm all right. I can go in the car and open this. But there was none in there. So I gave myself a little bit of a headache and had to really like think it's okay, just don't drink anymore, and then you can almost pretend that you've opened it when you got in the car, right? So you can see how these behaviors can start as like anchors that feel nice and bring me safety, and they can also then become problematic when they become too embedded in who I am, right? And I would also argue that there's actually nothing wrong with that behavior as long as I can create a world around me that accepts me. And it's only strange to people that don't do it. It's not strange to me. It's who I am. And again, that's why I think that we have a bit of an issue in society where instead of looking at how our society doesn't support the needs of the individuals, we look at how the individuals are not fit to society. And that's a huge problem.
It is. It's such a valid point, and I couldn't relate to it more because I have very severe OCD, and I've spent my whole life being, stop it, Pandora, stop it. Going in and out of doors is how a lot of it started. And then, as you so rightly alluded, I have behaviors like my exercise routine that are anchors. But unfortunately, they sort of get so huge, these behaviors and these patterns, that I then, they, at their worst, they start taking 7-8 hours a day. And actually, that's not okay. And what I have to work on is really reining it in. And it doesn't need to be this self-punitive regime. But as you say, it's so discombobulating when suddenly something doesn't go in the same order. But I'm working on trying to make my mind a bit more flexible. And actually, what I found really helpful is getting someone else to do my exercise program. So I look at it on my phone in the morning, and I'm not in control, I'm not in charge. And of course, I try and put in like a few exercises of my own, but they then become this sort of, I know that I'm giving into the OCD by doing these 3 exercises of my own, by not following it. And actually, as I get better and I sort of can see that my prefrontal cortex and my rational brain's more in control, it's amazing how the behaviors just start to wane. But I still feel somewhat imprisoned by those behaviors. And I think, as you say, you've got to get them to within such a short window if you need them.
Yeah.
And then slowly, I think as you get more self-confident and you just build on that sense of inner peace and safety, you might not need them. And if you do need them, as you say, society needs to stop judging.
Yeah. And that's the key, right? Is how do I learn to love myself in those moments, right? Rather than, oh, I'm such a loser, I've given myself a headache over a stupid drink, like I'm so stupid, I'm pathetic. How do I build self-compassion? How do I be loving to myself in that moment? And go, I'm not stupid, it's who I am. It's okay. It's okay, we're okay. This is cool, we can deal with this. So the solution is love and compassion, right? As perhaps cliche as that may sound. But you can take that love and compassion that I experience and that I try to embed into my own life as the solution to my own struggles. And then you can start to realize how if you grow up in an environment where you don't get that, right, and the very person that's supposed to install that in you is giving you the opposite, I think it's a huge problem. It's a huge, huge problem. And in a society that tells you that you should love your parents no matter what, right, that irrespective of how they behave and the impact it has on you throughout your whole life, you should abandon yourself. This is what society tells you. You should abandon yourself and find a way to love them, even if it's at the expense of yourself. And so people get lost in that. And the only solution is to make yourself the problem then. And I dread to think how many people live extremely difficult adult lives because nobody's told them how you feel makes sense based on your experience with your parents. And it's a huge problem. I think it's a very, and we can talk about toxic parents, but dysfunction in general and our inability to be able to explore the dysfunction that we've grown up in is a huge problem in our culture.
I agree. And I think the trouble is that we also only focus on people who have overtly addictive behaviors or diagnosable problems.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, a lot of people, particularly men, bury their emotions and bury their feelings. And it comes out in all sorts of weird ways. It comes out in not talking to family members. It comes out in being very aggressive, obsessive exercise, and things that are sort of somewhat acceptable. And yet you can see that they're really, really hurting inside. And yet we're only focusing on the people who are quote unquote ill.
Yeah. Well, we do that. We only focus on the extremes and everything, right? So we'll only focus on the people that are presenting as being, like you say, quote unquote ill. But then we will also, if we think about toxicity or emotional abuse, let me just say something about the word toxicity or toxic people. The reason I use the term is because if I said emotionally abusive parents, a lot of the people that I'm speaking to would think I'm not talking to them. So the reason I say toxic is because then people can go, okay, maybe there was a bit of toxicity when I was growing up. But what we're actually talking about is emotional abuse. And so I can talk about my dad and say, he would smash the house up, he was violent, there was domestic abuse. And most people will say, yeah, okay, I can see that would have a negative impact on you. But a lot of people grow up with a parent who, outside of the home, is very good at acting like they're an incredible person. And you have to remember that emotionally abusive, toxic people act a certain way when the public eye is facing them. So they don't look and seem like what we think. So people that have grown up with emotionally abusive parents will have often had everybody around them saying, you're so lucky to have this parent, right? Or you're so lucky that they're your mum, or you're so lucky that they're your dad. So when it's much more covert like that, it's harder for those people to acknowledge and then begin to work on some of those experiences than it is for me. If I go, here's what happened to my dad, 99% of people go, yeah, okay, that affects you. If these people go, wow, I just don't know, it was like the way that they were with me. People go, what do you mean? Well, it's because like emotional abuse in many cases is like death by 1,000 cuts. If I tell you one instance, you're like, that's not that bad. But when it's repeated and consistent and all of the time, then it has a huge impact, but it's very difficult, very subtle, and very difficult to describe. And that's what a lot of people struggle with, because they try and explain their experience in their adulthood of what their parents like. And most people say, maybe they're trying their best, or, they love you. They don't mean to be like it, or maybe it was what happened to them. And there's a level of truth in all of those things. And emotional abuse is emotional abuse. And sometimes we have to call things what they are so that people can have a starting point of truth. You have to start at truth, I think, and then work back from there.
Absolutely. And my mum won't mind me saying this because we've been on quite a long journey and we continue to be on the journey together. But she didn't know, and we've obviously had this conversation as well, she didn't know how to be the mother that I needed. And I was a very, very sensitive, anxious child. And she had been brought up in a very strange environment, never told that she was loved, very hands-off parenting, but she survived and she was okay with that. So why would she do anything differently? Because that worked for her. And it's taken me a really long time to get to the point where I accept that. I acknowledge, as you say, that for me, I received it as emotional abuse. I had a complete meltdown aged 11, and I have been on a 23-year long journey, which continues as a result. But I don't blame her, but it took me a long time to let go of that anger and to acknowledge, as you say, that it was emotionally abusive and it was toxic. Well, whilst other children might have reacted in a different way, I didn't. So it's also, I think it's very interesting what you say, because I think within one environment, one sibling might get away with actually being okay, and the other sibling might actually receive that as complete toxicity, and as a result develop all sorts of coping strategies.
And look, you make like really, really key points. Firstly, amazing that you've been able to navigate it in that way, right? And because I think it's not easy to do that, right? I think we live in a society that the moment that you talk negatively about anybody, but particularly a parent, people will judge that as meaning that it automatically means that there's less love, right? Or that you care less, right? And actually, emotions are way more nuanced, and two truths can be held at the same time, and they can be the opposite. I think even when I look at like my journey with my mum, she had no support with what we was going through with my dad, and made some wrong decisions. She was unable to be with me emotionally in some of the things that I experienced. And so I'm close with my mum, yeah. Like we have a great relationship, and I've had to explore that stuff, and that was really difficult to do because it felt like betrayal to my mum. It felt like I was saying like that you were a bad mum, right? And that's not exactly what I was saying. I was talking about she did the best that she could, and you can zoom out and then look at, like, I was a very sensitive, emotional boy as well. So there's societal stuff there. You talked a little bit about that with your mum. She was brought up in a certain way. And so, like, my mum's was taught that if a boy is like me, then you need to sort of metaphorically beat that sensitivity out of him to toughen him up. I mean, that's true for a lot of boys, by the way. So there's all this stuff going on, but I need to be able to first see it. Yeah. So once I see the truth, then I can work back from there. Then I may reach a place where I can understand what my parents been through. And there's people at different levels and different scales, right? We're talking about somewhere on that continuum. There are people as well, particularly, and I talk about this a lot in the book, who live with parents who are like right at the end of the toxicity, right? They're never going to self-reflect. If you ever bring anything up, they're going to make you feel even worse about the fact that you've brought it up. They'll never navigate it with you. And it's like real, like deep, ingrained emotional abuse. And we all sit somewhere on that continuum. We all sit somewhere on that continuum. I don't think in Western culture, at least, I don't think functional family systems exist. So whenever I'm sat with somebody who says I had the perfect upbringing, that's a red flag to me. Yeah, I'm thinking,
what's going on here?
Yeah, I'm thinking, no, you didn't. That's what I'm thinking when people say that, and you know, you see and hear that all the time, and I understand why that happens, and so that's why we need more open conversations. You know, and I'm a parent myself, by the way. So as a parent myself, I have to also be open to my own traits that will have and do negatively impact my children. And that's not easy. And again, that's another reason why people don't want to talk about it, right? Because if everybody starts talking about all the toxic traits of their parents, then as parents, you start thinking, there's probably a long list. Deep down, I'm thinking there's a long list my kids could do. And right, there is. There is. And I hope that one day when they need to do a bit of work around it, I hope that they'll be able to engage me. And I hope that I'll be working on myself enough to be able to at least validate what they think and what they see and how they think the way that I showed up impacted them. Because it will have.
I think, Josh, what you say is really interesting, because I think that although, yes, you might have made mistakes and errors, I think when you have the level of self-awareness and the insight that you clearly do, I think actually you're always going to create an environment that makes your children feel safe and loved and heard. And ultimately, I think those are the three things. And whenever parents say to me, what can I do for my child? You know, she's suffering with anorexia and she won't talk to me, or my son who's got crippling OCD and won't come out of his bedroom. I just say all you can do is to just love them and to hear them, because they're going through, I mean, who wants to inflict that level of pain onto themselves? Similarly with drinking or drugs, it does start to hurt, like after a certain level as we've spoken about. And it is a form of self-punishment, especially something like OCD and anorexia. And you have to get to the root of it. And actually all a parent can do, therefore, however much their behaviors might be quirky and they might be going through their own stuff, is to do those three things. And I think if you've given your children that, then I just, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't really see what more there is you can really give someone.
No, I don't think there is. I think what you need to do is you need to give them a home, right? And by a home, I don't mean a property, right? I mean somewhere where they feel safe to be seen, right? And so somewhere where you can be with them. And I'm also aware that life is hard, you know, and I have my own dysfunctional traits, my own toxic traits. And all I can do is work on them the best that I can and create a space where my kids feel like they can come to me. My kids feel like they're seen, like they matter, like they can have their experience and still be loved. And you do that, like you say, by creating safety and by creating love. So, like, do I think my kids will, as a result of that, get to their adulthood and have no struggles as a result of their childhood? No, I think they will have. I think there'll be stuff. There'll be stuff. You know, we're all a work in progress. But because the big saying is, give your kids a childhood they don't need to heal from, right? I kind of think good luck with that. I actually say try and be a parent that's loving enough that when your kids do have to do a bit of work when they're older, they can come to you. And I believe at the moment, and my eldest is 18, I believe that whatever happens in their life right now, all of them, all of my kids, after a brief panic, they'll know to phone me. And I think that's all you can do. You want to take all the pain away, and I want to take all the pain away. I want to fix everything for them. And sometimes I do a bit of that too much, actually, if I'm honest with you. It's probably one of my toxic traits. But I create the space. My kids know that they can come to me, and I think that's all you can do. Yeah.
I think also one thing that's really helped me is understanding different people's languages of love.
Mm.
And you can't control what a parent's language of love is or their child's language of love is. And if there's a mismatch, which in my case there was, and there is, and there continues to be, it's really, really challenging. So my mum's language of love is in doing things and enacting things and making things happen. And she's an incredible facilitator, and she's very generous with her time. And yet that's not her. Like, she doesn't know how to be emotional. She doesn't know how to connect with me. And she's not demonstrative in affection. Like, giving a hug or a kiss is a bit, oh God. Whereas I'm a more tactile person. I like telling people I love them. I like sending them thoughtful messages. There is a real mismatch. And it wasn't really until probably last year that I really started to sit with that and realize, okay, I've got to really accept what she does for me. And that's her limit. Like, her limitation is in that she can't be demonstrative or affectionate. And actually, maybe I'm also lacking in my ability to enact things for other people. And actually, I think if you open that dialogue and you can reflect in that, and again, as I say, you can't control what your child's language of love is. So I think that can be quite a powerful tool.
Yeah, and I think, look, one of the chapters in the book, there's a chapter called Healing Your Relationships. And what that chapter is about, you have to start at a place where you see your parent for exactly what they are, right? So that continuum that we talked about earlier, your mum sounds sort of similar to mine. My mum doesn't really do emotions, right? That's what I say. She does, like, she can do it with like babies and kids, yeah. But like me as an adult, we might give a cuddle, but it's a bit like we're doing it because we know we're supposed to. And if I say I'm struggling with something, she'll say, "You're not. You're all right. You're fine. You don't like, If I talk about my dad, she'll say you don't remember him, right? Because she doesn't want to do the emotions, right? And so it's easy to get lost trying to change that. Right. And I think you do that when you're a child, and then I think you do it when you're an adult. So as an adult, it might look like, if I could just get her to see this, or if I could just, and then you start trying to lay traps, or you change who you are, you abandon yourself. And if I show up this way, you have to see everybody, not just your parents, but for the purpose of like what we're talking about, you have to see the person for exactly as they are. Think of that continuum and see where they're able. Now, for some people, that we're talking toxic, horrible, narcissistic, nasty person who can't give you anything. You have to see that, know that you can't change any of that, and then make a decision yourself. Can I have a relationship with this person there? Is there any way for me to do that? That's the answer to that's individual, going to be different for everyone. In my case, I have to see my mum, see what she's able to give me, and then adjust my expectations. If I want a relationship with my mum, I can't force my mum to be a version of herself that I need her to be. Yeah? Because if I try and do that, then I'm manipulating anyway. So I have to see her truth, and then have a relationship with her in the way that she's able to do it. And what you can find is that actually a relationship that felt very much like you were banging your head against a brick wall can change and become something magical and special when you're able to meet each other where you're at, you know? So there's a lot to be said in that, and always highlighting the sort of really toxic end of that scale, and letting people know that sometimes no contact and cutting ties is the only option. And I get a lot of stick, because people say you shouldn't be encouraging people to cut ties, and I don't encourage anything. I encourage people to see the truth of who somebody is, and then make a decision on whether their life is livable, having a relationship of some kind with that person. And the truth is, in many cases, more than we'd like to admit, the answer is no for a lot of people. And what I will say, and I'll stand by, is that if that is you and the answer is no, it takes a hell of a lot of courage to go against everybody in this society and say, I'm going to put myself first. And so I think people that have done that should be really proud.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think it takes a lot to step away from that family environment because actually it is very courageous. And families, however dysfunctional they are somewhat anchoring, as we've said, and they are a bit of a safety net at the end of the day because ultimately we like to think of our family as the only people who love us unconditionally and they're always there, however shit that things might get.
Mm,
They will always pick you up and essentially love you.
mm,
But if that's not the case and you have got a severely narcissistic parent or parents, sometimes you just have to step away and sever that tie and find those connections and forge those bonds with other people who can
mm,
act as sort of surrogate parents in a way. And and again, in my journey, I've definitely found other anchors, people who for me can represent what my mum can't give me.
mm.
And they can. And I used to lean on friends and sort of always want, a best friend who could give me everything. And as I've got older, I've realized that you've got to spread that out. No one person can give you everything that you need. And actually, it's quite often having slightly older friends, say of my parents' generation, who are just at a different stage in life and are able to, I don't know, just act in that way.
Yeah, yeah. You're actively building your own community, right? And the old saying of like it takes a village to raise a child, and like we've heard all these kind of phrases before, but I do think that when you reach your adulthood, you should actively try and build a community. Like find mothering figures in your life, find fathering figures in your life, have relationships with people of all different like diversity and different age ranges, so that you're building a community of people like that. Like that's what community is, you know? So when people say you only get one mum and dad, well, it's actually, the reality is that your community evolves all of the time. And what a mothering figure looks like to me now might not be what it looks like to me in 20 years' time. But if I actively put community at the center of uh, like my life and what gives my life meaning, then I'm always actively building that. And that's played out in my life a lot, you know. I've actively had to work on different areas of the community in my life. I had to do a lot of work around men, right? My dad was a violent, angry, chaotic alcoholic. I didn't realize the imprint that left for me in men. I always thought men will hurt you. I thought men will hurt you and men will leave. That was my underlying belief around men. So it meant I didn't have any loving relationships with men. I knew how to like be lads and say, you know, I'm your mate and if anyone fights you, I'll fight them. I knew how to do that. But I didn't know how to let a man care for me or let myself care for a man. I thought men would just do you over. That's what I thought. And I had to work on that and like, you know, re-ingrain and re-imprint in my mind what a man is and what they can do for you in your life.
Mm.
And that's community building, you know?
It is. And I think that's such a valid point. I think so often we almost mimic with our friends the relationship we have with our parents.
Mm,
And when you're very used to being emotionally abused by a parent or having a narcissistic parent, it's amazing how when you reflect on your friendship group growing up, how many of those characters really were identical in their characters.
yeah.
I always had this tendency, and I was in treatment, and that was the first time I really, really realized that I did it, was I always would sidle up to the most popular girl as a queen bee character. And she always treated me so badly and was emotionally abusive. And I never felt loved or liked or, just basically safe in her company. And yet I would always convince myself that, I needed to be her best friend. And suddenly you realize, and in relationships as well, it's amazing how often people go again for the abusive parent in their partner.
Mm,
And until they've done the work on themselves, they suddenly realize that they're literally in a relationship with their abusive mother or father.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it is baffling, but it's because it feels safe and it feels comfortable and it's how you're used to being treated.
Mm, mm,
And so I think so many people, and particularly people who are listening to this episode, I think if you have had a dysfunctional upbringing or a toxic parent, you do need to sometimes cull some friends who don't treat you properly. Because I've definitely realized that it feels uncomfortable for me to have a friend who's really thoughtful and kind and sends me messages, it feels really nice, but it's also like, oh gosh, do they want something?
Yeah.
And what's their agenda? But equally, when people don't do it, you're sort of like, I'm there still sending them these loving, thoughtful messages and calling them every week. And why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Because it's that desire to feel wanted and feel attached, because I haven't quite built that enough within myself.
Yeah. And I was like it. I was like used to working hard to feel loved, you know? Like I thought love was a battle. And I've, even over the last sort of 10 years, there's been times when I'll be talking about a friend that I'm in touch with. I mean, I'm much better with this now. I've probably gone too far the other way, in that I don't trust anybody or give anybody a real chance, and I keep my my circle quite small. Maybe gone too far the other way. But in the past, like I say, my be like saying, "Oh, so and so, and he's said this, and I don't know why he said that," and my wife would be like, Why are you even friends with this guy? Like, do you know what I mean?" And like, in the end, I had to realize, wow, you grow and evolve through people. You know what I mean? And it's okay to not be friends with people. You don't have to get everybody to love you. And that was a big problem of mine. I had massive social circles when I was younger, very good at getting myself liked because I was so terrified of not being liked. I had to get everybody to love me. Even people I hated, I still wanted them to love me. And so I've had to really work on that over the years to think, you know, don't be likable. You don't want to be likable, right? Be likable is to abandon yourself and to be what people need you to be. Risk being liked. Risk being yourself and risk being not liked, you know? And that's what you have to get okay with is like somebody, if you're not someone's jam, if you're not someone's bag, that's okay, man. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. You're not supposed to be everyone's bag, you know? And by the way, like I think we've created quite a dysfunctional sort of society, a lot through social media, which is like we all look, everybody looks at themselves as a bit of a personal brand now. And the job of a personal brand is to get people to like you, right? So everybody's like, you feel like you're failing if not everybody likes you. So we're all trying to say the right thing. And then we've created a bit of a like walking on eggshells environment where it's like, you're not allowed to like somebody if they even have one view that doesn't line up with the general popular view. Yeah, like this happens all the time. I say, "Oh yeah, I kind of like that person." They're like, "Yeah, but didn't you hear that they did this last year?" And you're like, "Yeah, I did. Yeah, that wasn't great. So why'd you like them?" It's like, what? I didn't say I like every single thing that they do. I just, on the whole, like, do you know what I mean?
They're human.
They're human. They're human. And yeah, that's dysfunction again. Like, we create these dysfunctional environments. I don't know how I got there, by the way.
No, it is very true. And unfortunately, again, as Gabor Mate says, like if we don't feel that attachment growing up and as a child, you're constantly trying to find that attachment. And therefore you're like a chameleon. You'll adapt and you'll change your behavior in order to fit in because you so crave that attachment.
Mm,
And I think for both of us, it sounds like we never felt that true attachment. And therefore, of course, everyone wants to be a member of a tribe. And that's just primal instinct.
yeah.
And so you spend your life trying to fit in, trying to belong. And I hated school and university because I found the cliques just so hard to penetrate and to manage, and feeling so rejected by, three members of the gang, and not being just absorbed into one particular sort of tribe. And I think as I've got older, that's got a tiny bit easier, but still there's that element of, you hear of a friend who's going off with 10 other friends on a holiday and you're not asked, because that's their kind of core clique. And it's always hard, that feeling.
It's interesting because like, I see those sort of cliques in society everywhere, and they really, like, I can even feel my body when you talk about it activated. I see them online, like I see the cliques on. I see them everywhere, and they make me wanna like actively go against them, like actively do stuff to frustrate and annoy them. So, but again, it's like you say, this all comes from those initial years of seeking attachment, and even when you said earlier about finding ourselves in relationships with people that might emulate our parents, right? People often say to me that I grew up with toxicity or emotional abuse, and now I feel like I just attract these people. I don't think you attract them. I think toxic, emotionally horrible, abusive people throw out the net and they'll take anyone that's willing to take the bait. I think when you haven't had that um, thorough attachment when you're a child, when you didn't get that proper attachment, you become risk to because you're not in touch with your body normally. Then, as a result, so you don't listen to your intuition. You have a tendency to justify or ignore red flags, and so then you become vulnerable to being caught in the net that they throw out. So it's not that you attract them because emotionally abusive people come out nice at the beginning, yeah, but sort of if you've got good, healthy attachment, you'll feel those red flags early on. And the healthy thing to do as a human is when I'm in the company of somebody, if my body doesn't feel good in your company, I don't really care if it's a me or a you thing. My body's telling me that this relationship's not for us. And I think when you're not in tune with your body, or you don't know how to trust your body, you feel it and you think, oh, I don't know what that is. Is that my body telling me maybe it's love that I'm feeling, you know? So you're confused all of the time and then you end up just going where attachment is being offered. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Total sense. And it's so ironic that I was having this exact conversation with a friend who's somewhat struggling in a relationship at the moment. And she's someone who's not very secure and definitely is working on that element of building her own self-love. And there are a few red flags in this relationship. And to me, it's as though she knows instinctively that there's this huge red flag and she's aware of it, but she's trying to ignore it and trying to convince herself that actually it will pass and it can be remedied. And I'm not sure. And the trouble is that how much can you change another person until they're really willing to sit and reflect? And sadly, in this day and age, particularly when it involves men, a lot of them don't want to sit with themselves and do the work and actually change. So, as you say, you have that instinct. And so often we actually just really need to go with our instinct. And if you know that a person isn't right for you, and I think as girls get older and to a certain age, and there's this, biological clock ticking, and there's a sense of, oh my God, I've got to meet someone because if I want to have kids and all my friends are getting married, and I'm going through that at the moment. But I really remain, and my three sort of remaining single friends all have got into serious relationships in the last 6 months. And it's been really hard, but I'm not going to just attach myself to anyone because A, I don't think I'm quite ready yet. And B, I just know that it will come from a slight, I don't know, just a place of insecurity rather than actually being in my power and then the right person coming along.
Yeah, and the way that you're talking about is like the right way.
I hope, Josh.
But it is because it's your way, by the way. Like everybody's way, if you're leaning into what you truly believe and you're doing that, then it's the right way. A lot of us end up doing stuff because that's what society tells us that we should do. Society says if you're 30, you're running out, you should get married and settle down. And so many people end up saying goodbye to their power, ignoring red flags to go against the panic and just do what the society is pressuring them into doing. And there's a lot around what society pushes on us, like even in like the healing sort of space, the spiritual space, which I love, by the way, right? But there's things that I see in it that I think we shouldn't, everybody says you should see the good in everybody. And I'm like, yeah, you should. You should also see the bad in them as well. You should see everything in everybody and then make a judgment on whether you want them to be around you and part of your life. Because you cannot rely on the belief that they will somehow change for you. You can't rely on that. Some people do change. I'm somebody who changed, yeah? I continue to change. I believe in change. I believe people change. And you don't have any power over that. You don't have any power over somebody else changing. You can't bet your life. You can't bet your life on somebody changing to be what you want them to be. You can't bet your life. It might pay off, but you shouldn't risk it. You should see people for exactly as they are and make your decisions based on that. Now, that's confronting because as I say it, I can think to myself, but if people saw every part of me, would they love me? That's confronting. And that's what scares us. So that's why we box it all down and say, well, let's just ignore some of that because it stems from the idea that in and of myself, if you take into account every part of who I am, I'm scared that I'm not lovable. And if I'm scared that I'm not lovable when I take into every part of myself into account, then I'm scared that I won't find somebody that's lovable if I take into every part of them. So then people ignore red flags. And you have to see people clearly. Start there, you know?
That's a really, yeah, really excellent point. I mean, and as you were saying that, it sort of struck me that, yeah, I've got a lot of very extreme, quirky behaviors. And actually, it's only very recently that I've started to be like, you know what? Like, if you want to judge me, then judge me. And I'm going to still feel the shame somewhat because I think
Mm,
it's so ingrained, particularly those of us who have had addictive personalities or tendencies or obsessiveness or eating disorders, whatever it is. I think there's a lot of guilt and shame caught up in, our just emotional psyche. And we've got to really work on that constantly. So putting all your behaviors on the table does induce that feeling of, God, I'm so ashamed of this. Like I'm such a weirdo. And that narrative plays on in our head all the time. It's like
mm.
that self-saboteur that just really appears way too often than we want it to. But it's actually being able to part that and being like, no, actually, thank you, but I'm not going to listen to you. And I'm going to carry on doing what I'm doing at the moment. And as you said, we're all a work in, well, hopefully we're all a work in progress. Those of us who have the self-awareness and who want to change are a work in progress. And that's the exciting side of life. I mean, for me, if
Yeah,
I didn't think I could change, my God, I would have given up years ago. But I see those little glimmers and I see the changes happening and the satisfaction in it. And sometimes when you're really down and you just feel so suffocated by all these little things that you're doing. But other times you're like, God, if I reflect on where I was last year, I've actually come a really long way.
yeah.
And that to me gives life its edge.
And that's what life is, right? That's what life is. It's like Alan Watts talks about life it's not a game. It's not about getting to the end fast. It's not a race. Life's more like a dance, right? And what makes a dance good is nothing to do with the beginning and the end necessarily. It's about how you move and weave in the middle, right? And I think the sense of shame that we feel about a lot of parts of ourselves is because of our family systems, but the wider societal systems. Like from the age of 5, we're pushed into a system and told if you don't fit adequately into this system for the next 10 years, then you're going to be of no use to the world, right? Your value is going to be based on how well you do at school for the next 10 years. So there's all of this stuff going on when we're children that like prevents us from being our authentic selves, you know? Some of our weird and wonderful quirks that might have been laughed at when we were kids or that our parents might have struggled with when we were kids. We begin to hide them. And then we think that in order to be loved, we got to hide them. I even look at my own marriage today. At the beginning of the marriage, in my quest to be lovable, I hid loads of parts of myself. I changed, I self-edited, I self-organized. And then your relationship becomes like, I need to come out. I need to come out to my wife here and say, I'm sorry. Like, that's not who I am. And it's not even that I've changed. It's that I've never been that. I just hid it or edited it because I wanted you to love me and I feared that you wouldn't if I showed that. And that's why relationships are hard because this is where our wounds play out. Our wounds play out in relationships. And that's why I think as you go on that journey of self-discovery and healing, your circle does get smaller and you have to be a little bit careful that you don't go, I realize this whole game's a lot easier when I'm just on my own and I don't have to navigate relationships. And then if I'm not careful, I become a hermit, right? And I don't want to go anywhere. I get invited to social events and I'm just like, nah. I'd rather not jostle having to work on myself to be around people. So I'll just be on my own. And then you go too far the other way, you know? So it's like, but that's the dance, you know? And I think when you're deep feeling, like most people that are on the healing journey are, that's why they're on it, then you ebb and flow and the waves are big and then they crash harder than the average person. 'Cause we're not like everybody else. And the world's not really built, in Western culture at least, it's not really built for people like us. It's built for people like my older brother, who he's a great guy. But sometimes I'll say to him, we go out on our bikes. We haven't done for a little while, but we used to go out on our bikes, and I'd say something, and he'd go, "Yeah, never really thought of it that way." And I'm like, "You've never thought of it that way." Like, I have to work so hard to get to a place where I don't think of it that way. And he's just, he's different. It's not that my way's right or his way's wrong, but he's different. And speaking out of turn and telling his story a little bit, but the world's built a little bit more for people like that, for people like him. The world is built for them. It's not built for people like us. And the reason I say that is because I think it's important to understand that I am not the problem. I am not the problem. I exist predominantly in a structure and a system that's not adequately been built for me. And that helps me with compassion. That helps me with thinking I'm all right. There's a lot of people out here, and there's a lot of people out there like me. Just got to look a little bit harder.
You're
I think
so
there's
right.
less of us.
And how amazing is it when you can just have conversations like this and you just penetrate so many layers straight away, because there's no small talk. And that's why I find drinks parties so difficult, because first of all, it's always like, oh, so Panda, have you met someone yet? Or do you want children? Or how's work going? And actually, like, oh my God, I want to get really down to the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
And that's where this podcast has been so amazing, because I get the opportunity to just like siphon off all that bullshit basically and just have these raw and real conversations, which I'm hoping other people who are listening will find equally as meaningful and powerful.
They will, man. And particularly people like us, right? People that are like that. Because I'm like you. Like I say, I can't stand people sometimes. I can't stand people. Like, and that's all right, Like, I love people. I love humans, love being around people until I don't. And the small talk thing's just it's not my jam anymore. I don't want to sit round and pretend. Like, I don't want to do that. I want to, like, I'll go deep. Let's go deep. I'll do that all night long. But not this small talk stuff. It's so draining.
I know, it really is.
But it's common, that's more common. It's just.
But it's also very English. It's that stiff upper lip mentality.
Yeah.
Again, it plays out in all sorts of social interactions. It's always like when you pick up the phone and someone's like, "Hi, how are you?" "Fine." I'm always baffled by the question, "How are you?" I sort of say sometimes, "Well, how long have you got?"
Yeah.
Because are you really asking me, or is it just a gesture? And that's the thing with particularly men and their mental health. A lot of men, so campaigners, are now saying, you say, "How are you?" And then you're like, "No, but really, how are you?"
Yeah.
And actually ask it again when you really want a sort of authentic answer.
Yeah. And create the space properly.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I say to men. Like, create the space properly. Like, if you really want to know how someone is, then go out of your way to create a space to give them the opportunity. And that's what I think men are not great at, is creating the spaces. Because a lot of people will say, we often say that men find it really difficult to do emotions. That's not true, right? It's not remotely true, because go to a football game on the weekend, there'll be loads of genders there, but there's a lot of men there, and they'll go through every single emotion seemingly without control. So they don't find it hard at all. What we lack is spaces where they feel like it's safe and okay to do that. When I used to cry at football when I was younger, cry watching my team, I'd be like a good, passionate, strong man. All the lads would, he loves it, doesn't he? Loves his team, loves his team. I wasn't crying because of that. I was crying because it was the only place where I got to express emotions with men. And I run a men's event called Uncommon Man. We've been running that for nearly 3 years now, once a month in London. And when you create a space that's built for that, that's like, there's no alcohol served or anything like that. You just come together. We're going to do some breathing and some chatting, and we're going to look at some of our stuff. Men do emotions. Men do emotions when they think that the space is created adequately. So it's not an emotional struggle. It's not an emotional problem. It's a space problem. We don't create enough space for men. And actually, I think we don't create enough spaces for all groups, So I regularly go to a recovery space where I'm in a group with people that are in recovery from addiction, right? Because I need regularly to speak and hear people that have been through something that I understand. I need to be around them. So I need that. And then I need particularly men's spaces for me, right? But I think everybody needs particular spaces, and those spaces should exist so that we can go out and feel comfortable in the more mixed and diverse spaces that we also exist in.
Mm. Josh, finally, and I could go on for hours talking to you because it's fascinating. But what advice would you give someone who's embarking on that healing journey and they realize that they've had a dysfunctional upbringing or a toxic parent or parents, and they want to start reparenting themselves, but they just don't have a clue where to start?
Look, what I would say is go out and explore, right? Because there's no right way to do this. There's lots of people doing amazing work out there. For me, inner child work was revolutionary for me. Doing that properly by understanding who I am in the world today and then working back from there. But look, you could write a book on. I did write a book on it. I guess that's what the book is about, right? But go out and explore. Go out and try things. And always, always hold the knowing that it's okay to change your mind and it's okay to have been wrong up until this point. And what I mean by that is the 12 years of actively being on my own journey, I've found things that absolutely worked in that moment and were absolutely right. And I swore by them. And now I don't use them modalities and they don't work for me and they're not what I like in this moment. And so it's okay. It's okay to pick things up, let them work, evolve through them, and then find another thing. It's the journey. I know it's cliched, but it is the journey, and it's riding those waves and exploring yourself. And the last thing with that is find a community of people to do it with. That's really important. I wrote a whole chapter of that in the book. Find a community. It doesn't have to be a healing community. I talked about recovery spaces, men's spaces. It could be a gym community. It could be like a CrossFit thing. It could be a yoga thing. It could be a dog walking thing. But find people. Find people that you can start to explore the version of yourself that you're becoming with. Because I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It's been such an honor and a pleasure. And thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Time went really fast.
I know.
Which is a good sign. So thank you.
Okay, well, that's good.